In the name of motherhood, love, and patriotism, I ask for your attention. If you suffer from circulation of the blood, ideas in the mind, and unfiltered air in the lungs, this program is for you. It's titled Language in Action, and it features Dr. S.I. Hayakawa.
Hey, did you clear that speech with the doc?
Why, no. I simply decided to try a little experiment in advertising. I tried to follow all the best principles.
Well, if you ask me, I think you just tried to make a little experiment in making a fool of yourself.
I did not.
You did too.
I did not.
Hey, wait a minute. Wait a minute. Well, go ahead, say it. Ouch, you're twisting my arm, you ruffian. I'll twist your neck if you don't stick to the facts.
Oh, very well. Ladies and gentlemen, the fact is that it is time to introduce our senior colleague, Dr. S.I. Hayakawa.
Well, Fuddley, it's thoughtful of you to try to put some advertising punch into your introduction. I guess you feel that this program needs some salesmanship, and maybe you're right. Anyway, tonight we're going to examine the language of advertising, and incidentally, we shall also have something to say about the language of poetry. Because poetry and advertising, although apparently very different from each other, have the common property of being uses of language to express preferences or valuations. By this I mean that whether a poet writes of a mountain scene or an advertising copywriter writes of a new type of mattress, both are expressing a preference over this mountain scene over other scenes, this mattress over other mattresses, and they are inviting the reader to share this preference. Let's take up the question of advertising first. Economists and others tell us that advertising performs a necessary commercial function. And they tell us that our whole economy would hardly be able to survive without it. And I'm not disposed to argue with them on this point. Basically, advertising performs two functions. First of all, it informs the reader or listener about the existence of a product. It describes it. It tells its price. In this respect, advertising, like the language of science, simply gives information that is verifiable. But the second and more prominent feature of advertising is that much of advertising is more than simply informative. It attempts to surround a product with meanings which may or may not be intrinsic to the product being advertised. As you all know, certain brands of cigarette, let us say, may be associated with fashionable living, or with masculine companionship, or with sportsmanship, or any of a number of other desirable things. It is suggested about many patent medicines that they will ward off or cure all kinds of ills. And this is made in the form of a suggestion only, of course, because since specific claims of curative powers would only get them in trouble with the law. Perfectly commonplace products like breakfast food are made to suggest athletic prowess or spaceship travel, although how the consumption of processed and desiccated grain cereals bring us any closer to the moon is never specifically explained. And you will also have noticed that as advertising becomes more competitive, it tends to give less and less actual information about a product and more irrelevant suggestion. This absence of information and this deluge of fancy connotation in advertising has come to the point, as you must agree, of arousing the disgust of many adults and even the jeering cynicism of little children.
Hey, wait a minute, Doc. It isn't as bad as all that. You can learn a lot from an ad. Now listen to this one about a car. Drive the Satellite, the only true aristocrat in the automotive field. Naturally, you'll appreciate the jet smooth power plant of the rocket-principled Satellite, the first real car of the space age.
Well, that's a pretty typical ad, Crashaw. What did you learn from it? What did it tell you? Let's go back to the idea we were discussing in an earlier program about physically verifiable meaning. What did the ad say that can be verified by observation or measurement? You're the man who's always talking about wanting the facts, Crashaw. How many facts are there in that ad?
Facts, huh?
Yeah.
Well, let's see now. Drive the Satellite, the only true aristocrat. Well, there's a car named the Satellite, and it's an aristocrat, although there's some guys who might give you an argument about that aristocrat stuff, you know.
That's right, Crashaw. Let's sort of break this down. I'm going to go up the blackboard here, and let's put down some of these expressions used in that ad and see what they mount up to. Aristocrat. That certainly is a judgmental term, and it's obvious that one man's aristocrat is somebody else's junk heap, and therefore it's very much a matter of opinion. Naturally, you'll appreciate whatever it is. But is that a statement about a car? No, it's a statement about you and how it is hoped that you will react. That certainly doesn't tell us anything about the car. Then it says jet smooth. I don't know how smooth jet is or in what sense the term is being used, but go on from there, rocket principled. What on earth is a rocket-principled car? In what way do you use the principle of rockets in an internal combustion engine? Actually, when you look it over, all you get from this ad is the name of the car and perhaps the fact that it has an engine, because I suppose that's what they mean by a power plant. As a matter of fact, you know, you can't even tell from this ad whether or not the car's got wheels.
Well, Crashaw, I trust you weren't so impressed by that advertisement that you rushed out to purchase a Satellite.
Oh, no, that kind of stuff doesn't affect me. And anyway, I just bought a new Turbo Prop 8. You know, that's the only car with jungle virility and space platform styling.
Oh.
Well, as Crashaw's reaction to that advertising suggests, is not advertising one of the great examples of the semantic manipulation of our minds that is going on constantly? In advertising, great emphasis is placed upon brand names. And these names are loaded up with all kinds of connotations of fashion, of elegance, of health, of social exclusiveness, of success in love, and all sorts of desirable things, as well as with the suggestion that all sorts of dangers, real or imaginary, are warded off. The name itself is invested at tremendous expense with a kind of magic. Ultimately, we become slaves of those names, and we distrust our own senses as we distrust the unknown brand, preferring instead the magic of the brand name simply because of the name. All this is terribly distressing to me as a student of semantics, because in semantics we try to cultivate the habit of checking words with things, language with fact. Advertising, an enormous amount of consumer advertising, works on exactly the opposite principle, namely teaching us to trust names alone. And much of semantics then appears to me to be systematic semantic miseducation. Another way of creating automatic reactions that you find often in advertising is by not talking about the product, but talking about you. The technique is to manipulate your self-concept. That is, to manipulate the way in which you think about yourself in order that you may want and desire certain consumer products. Because you are a man of standing in your community, it is suggested, You owe it to yourself to wear an imperial cravat, $12 and up at the better stores. Because you are a modern housewife and not an old-fashioned one, you owe it to yourself to trade in your old refrigerator. Because you are a man of distinction, of course you must drink old reprobate or whatever. Every kind of symbol of love, of motherhood, of patriotism, every symbol of hope, of fear, and so on, is used in order to sell us things. And here again, semantics goes far beyond the informative or descriptive function of language, that is, of describing the product, in order to penetrate into our imaginations, into our dreams and our hopes and our fears. You are a popular girl, or you would be if you wore such and such a bra. You are a popular girl, or you would be if you didn't offend. And so on and so on. I imagine if we were to turn on this television set right now, we would find dozens more examples right away of this technique of manipulating the self-concept.
Oh, Doctor, please don't turn on the set. I think the point is clear enough without having to use any more examples to illustrate it.
All right, Fuddley, in deference to your sensibilities, I won't. But I wonder if we really had enough illustrations at this point. Listen, Fuddley, tell me, what kind of a typewriter do you use?
Well, I use a monotype.
Why?
Don't you use the same kind of machine yourself? After all, it's advertised as the only machine for men whose every word is important.
Look, Fuddley, aren't you permitting your concept of yourself to influence your judgment of a machine?
No, that is, Oh.
Well, don't look at me, you jerk. I don't type.
Please understand, I'm not opposed to all of advertising. But insofar as advertising has become a way of overcoming us with words, and largely with words alone, it has become a form of psychological warfare, of consumer brainwashing, with dollars as the booty of warfare. Let me explain what I mean by being overcome by words alone, independent of the things they're supposed to stand for. If you regard words, images, pictures, ideas inside the head as a reality in themselves, independent of what they stand for in real life, is this not the pattern of the mental illness known as schizophrenia? And the dangers in advertising of the kind that I have described lies exactly in this systematic promotion of what I shall call pathological semantic reactions to words and other symbols.
Hey, Doc, I think I'm beginning to get the point. You know, I once worked for a guy who was pushing a medicine. See? We worked out a pitch for the stuff that didn't have much to do with what we were selling. It went something like this. Stay on top of the world all the time. For that lonely feeling, accompanied by aching muscles, use Dr. Philpott's snake oil. It's guaranteed by a doctor and contains the magic scientific ingredient slitharium. It'll make your joints absolutely slushy, so use slitharium and stay on top of the world.
Tut, 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 Crashaw. That's a terrible use of language. Just to clear the air, let me read this. The world is too much with us, late and soon. Getting and spending, we lay waste our powers. Little we see in nature that is ours.
Oh, you can't kid me. That's the beginning of an ad for some retirement fund.
I think I'm going to be sick.
Fuddley's quotation from Wordsworth's sonnets and Crashaw's reaction to it brings us back to the problem of poetry. You'll recall Crashaw said that Wordsworth's poem sounds like the beginning of a commercial. In our times, hasn't this generally become true, and does this not account for much of the distrust of poetry that is current? Let me read some examples of poetry, such as student study in high school and college, well-known and familiar poetry. Here's a poem of John Keats. To one who has been long in city pent, 'tis very sweet to look into the fair and open face of heaven, to breathe in prayer full in the smile of the blue firmament. Whatever Keats may have intended by that poem, does this not sound to you like a perfect opening for a commercial in behalf of, let's say, a summer resort? Let's try again. Here is a poem of Robert Herrick, the 17th century lyricist. When as in silks my Julia goes, then methinks how sweetly flows the liquefaction of her clothes. Well, this is an ad for the ladies' wear in a good department store. In other words, it becomes difficult to take delight in a woman's beauty without sounding like an ad, although it used to be possible in Herrick's time, or even in Byron's time. Here's Byron. She was a phantom of delight when first she gleamed upon my sight. That's a good ad for a beauty treatment, cosmetics, and so on. So, I'm raising the question, I wonder if this clash between poetry and advertising is not in part responsible for the fact that so much of modern poetry is extremely difficult to understand and also sort of gloomy in its sentiments. Because it has become very, very difficult nowadays to be simple, direct, passionate, and enthusiastic about anything without sounding as if you were leading into a commercial. I would like to hear the opinions of poets in my audience about this point. Here are some other considerations about advertising and poetry that I'd like to bring to your attention. The situation of the advertising writer, sponsored by the seller of products, is not altogether novel or new in the world. There's another literary situation something like it, namely that of the court poet or the poet laureate, who used to enjoy the sponsorship in earlier days of emperors, kings, or princes. The similarity lies in this fact. Both the advertising writer and the court poet sing the praises of their sponsor, and they get fired if they speak against him. Now, it's a curious fact, but just as the court poet sometimes rose above his job of flattering his king or prince, and occasionally began to write wider and deeper sentiments important to their entire culture, in a similar way, the ad copywriter has also occasionally risen, especially in the form of advertising known as institutional advertising, to express deeper and loftier sentiments which are important to the culture as a whole, and beyond the problem of simply praising his sponsor or his product. I would like to illustrate the similarity between these two situations by reading two examples. One by a poet laureate, and the other by an American advertising copywriter. The first thing I would like to read you is by the poet laureate to the court of Queen Victoria, the famous Alfred Tennyson. And in 1852, when the nation was in mourning because of the death of the Duke of Wellington, Tennyson wrote his very famous ode of that occasion. And let me read you a little of it from the beginning lines. Bury the great Duke with an empire's lamentation. Let us bury the great Duke to the noise of the mourning of a mighty nation. Mourning when their leaders fall, warriors carry the warrior's pall, and sorrow darkens hamlet and hall. Where shall we lay the man whom we deplore? Here in streaming London's central roar, let the sound of those he wrought for and the feet of those he fought for echo round his bones forevermore. Lead out the pageant, sad and slow, as fits a universal woe. And let the long, long procession go, let the sorrowing crowd about it grow, let the mournful martial music blow, the last great Englishman is low. Now let's compare that poem with this curious document, an institutional ad published on the occasion of national mourning in the United States when the tomb of the unknown soldier was dedicated after World War II. This is the text of this advertisement. The title is, "He is a Stranger Who is My Brother." This is a story of a man I never knew, yet I know all about him. He is dead now, and he lies in a tomb of polished marble whose splendor would surprise him. And the people come from everywhere to stand here with their heads bowed, their eyes serious, their hearts filled with mourning for a man they never knew. Because he wore a uniform when he died, they call him the unknown soldier. I think he was a good soldier, though fighting was never his business. He was a man of peace, I am sure, though he never told me. He was born on a farm in the Dakotas, or was it a miner's cottage in Pennsylvania, a tenement in the Bronx, a ranch house in Texas, or was it a duplex apartment on Park Avenue? I can't be sure. As I stand here with my hat in hand in reverence of the grave of this man I never knew, I don't know his name or his business, whether his grammar was good, what his accent was, what books he read, what church he went to, which way he voted, how much money he had. Was he a poet, a bookkeeper, a truck driver, surgeon, lumberjack, errand boy, or student? Was he telling a joke, cursing his sergeant, or writing his family when the missile came? I don't know. For when they picked this man from all our nameless dead, he was lying quietly in his closed coffin and known only to God. But I do know that he is deserving of honor and respect for whoever he may be. I feel quite sure that he must have believed as I do in the equality of men, the promise of men, and the duty of men to live justly with each other and with themselves. And that is why I stand here with my hat in hand to reverence the grave of a stranger who is my brother, my father, my son, my countryman, my friend. For an empire such as Queen Victoria presided over, the Ode on the Death of Duke of Wellington is a beautiful and appropriate sentiment, beautifully done. And for the kind of society we live in, namely a democratic society, it seems to me that this prose ode or prose poem to the unknown soldier is also appropriate and very beautifully done. And this is what I say when I propose the opinion that advertising has gone beyond the writing of consumer copy in that it gets to the point of taking upon itself, especially at the level of institutional advertising, the expression of official sentiments of a culture. We find that advertisers, like poets, perform this basic and fundamental, perhaps I should say literary function, of giving people a way of seeing themselves, a way of investing their lives with meaning. The fact of this closeness of the relationship between poetry and advertising is brought home in another document which I should like to read to you. Dynasty and empire come and are gone. Conquerors ride and ride no more. A gun speaks and a gun is silent, and time, the slow tendril, conceals the green years. What endures then? Art and music and the imperishable convictions of the immortal soul. Melody heard in an April garden will enchant 1,000 Aprils. Fragments of song addressed to the heart will die only when time dies. Music abides. It stays and will stay. All our tomorrows reach out glad arms to embrace it. Enjoy it now with the new Comet radio phonograph, which offers a beauty of cabinet design a richness of tone, a standard of engineering for which you might expect to pay far more than the modest price asked. Well, we have examined advertising, its worst manifestations in the promotion of semantic disorder, as well as its best manifestations in the expression of the evaluations of a nation in a time of national mourning. I wonder if I can't summarize what I've been trying to say here by a further quotation. It seems to me that there is no sense in objecting, as some people do, to advertising and to propaganda because they are based upon emotional appeals, unless language that is valuative has affective and emotional power of some kind. It's useless. And the problem of language is not whether or not it is emotional, but whether or not the promises of advertising or propaganda are delivered, whether or not things happen as promised. So, the important question about any propaganda directive is this: will things happen as promised if I do as I am directed? If I accept your philosophy, will I achieve peace of mind? If I vote for your candidate, will my taxes be reduced as promised? If I use Lifeguard soap, will my boyfriend come back to me as promised? Now, we rightly object to advertisers who make false or misleading claims and to politicians who ignore their promises. Life being as uncertain and unpredictable as it is, we are constantly trying to find ourselves some kind of way of predicting the future to bring about desirable events and to avoid undesirable events. If we can rely upon the predictions made by advertising or propaganda, then the uncertainties of life are reduced, and we are grateful for the fact that they exist. When, however, directive utterances are of such a character that things do not happen as promised, when after we have done as we have been told, peace of soul has not been found, the taxes have not been reduced, and the boyfriend has not returned, there is disappointment. Such disappointments may be trivial or grave, but they are serious in their implications, because each of them serves in greater or less degree to break down that mutual trust that makes cooperation possible and knits people together into a society. And maybe that's what semantics is for, so that we may learn to be critical of the language we hear.
This is National Educational Television.